Before the chandeliers dimmed for the keynote, before the orchestra slipped into its quieter movement, a young woman in a borrowed gown crossed a line that no one in the Vance Pavilion had ever seen crossed before. She lifted the silver tray she had been carrying. She set it down on the auction table, and then she stepped onto the small carpeted platform reserved for the night's honored guest, picked up the microphone that had just been placed there for him, and said into a room of 900 people, "He is not who you think he is." The hall went still. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. Conversations folded mid-sentence. Somewhere near the back, a waiter dropped a fork, and the sound of it striking the floor was the loudest thing in the building. 40 feet away, beneath the second balcony, a man in a charcoal suit who had been standing motionless for 6 minutes finally moved his hand from his pocket. Because men like him had spent a lifetime learning the difference between a woman about to be ruined and a woman about to ruin someone. And Do Hyun-yoon knew, before she said another word, which one she was. The Vance Pavilion was not a building so much as a statement. It had been carved from limestone in 1908 by a railroad family that no longer existed, and every renovation since had only deepened the impression that the rooms inside were not meant for ordinary people. The ceilings rose 42 feet. The chandeliers had been imported from a closed opera house in Vienna. The marble underfoot had been quarried from the same hills that supplied the cathedrals of Genoa. Tonight was the Halverford Foundation's annual benefit gala. Black tie, closed guest list. No one in the room had paid less than $10,000 to be there. Senators were present, 2 ambassadors, a former Treasury Secretary, the CEO of a pharmaceutical conglomerate that had, the week before, settled a class action lawsuit for $940 million without admitting any wrongdoing. It was the kind of room where the air itself felt expensive, where every smile had been rehearsed and every handshake calculated, where the orchestra played a softened Brahms sonata in the corner and no one listened. The walls were dressed in white orchids. The auction items glittered on velvet plinths along the east wall, and in the center of all of it, raised on a low platform draped in cream silk, stood the portrait of the man being honored. His name was beneath it in gold serif lettering. Pemberton Halverford III. The walls of the Vance Pavilion had seen a great many things in their 117 years. They had never seen what was about to happen next. Her name was Myron Sokoloff. She was 26 years old, and she did not belong in this room. She had been told to belong, dressed in a borrowed midnight blue gown that had been altered for her in a back room 4 hours earlier by a woman who never looked her in the eye. The pearl earrings she wore were not hers, and she had been told, very clearly, that she would be expected to return them at the end of the night. She was small, 5'3". Her hair was a deep auburn that caught the chandelier light when she moved, and her eyes were the color of pale gray sea glass. She was beautiful in the way quiet things are beautiful, not in the way the room rewarded. If you had watched her closely from across the floor, you would have noticed that she did not drink the champagne offered to her, that she had eaten nothing from the passing trays, that she stood at the edges of every conversation with her hands folded in front of her, the posture of a person trying not to take up space. You would have noticed her left thumb worrying at the inside of her right wrist, again and again, the way someone touches an old scar to remember it is there. You would have noticed the way she flinched, almost imperceptibly, every time the man on her arm laughed too loudly. The man on her arm was Pemberton Halverford III, the honoree. He was 48 years old, silver at the temples, with a smile that had been calibrated by decades of public attention. He kept one hand at the small of her back at all times, in a gesture that looked tender from a distance and felt like a vice from where she stood. She had met him 11 months ago. That was all it had taken. To strip her of her apartment, her job, her phone, her checking account, her last living friend, the small inheritance from her grandmother that had been meant to pay for graduate school, and the soft confidence she had once carried into a room full of strangers. She had been a graduate student in art conservation when they met, Raised in upstate New York by a single mother who taught middle school history and a grandmother who had survived 3 kinds of war and never spoken about any of them. She had dreamed of restoring damaged paintings in museums, of returning beauty to things the world had given up on. She had not dreamed of this. Tonight, beneath the borrowed pearls, Marin was carrying something in the small, beaded clutch at her wrist, a folded document, 6 pages. She had not slept the night before because she had read those pages 41 times, and each time, the thing inside her chest that had once been hope had hardened into something quieter, something with edges. She did not know that across the room, a man in a charcoal suit had been watching her hands for the last 20 minutes. She did not know he had noticed the tremor. She did not know he had seen these things before, in another room, a long time ago, on the hands of someone he had not been able to save. But she would. In 4 minutes and 17 seconds, she would know. To understand how Marin came to be standing on that platform, you have to go back almost 2 years, to a Tuesday in October, in a coffee shop on the corner of Brennan Street and 9th. She had stopped on her way home from a double shift at the conservation lab. She was tired in the specific way graduate students are tired. She had ordered the smallest coffee on the menu because the smallest coffee was $1.75, and that was what she had decided, that morning, she could afford. He had been in line behind her. He had paid for her coffee before she could stop him. He had said his name was Pemberton, that he was sorry for being presumptuous, that he had simply liked the way she had asked the barista about the origin of the beans. If she ever wanted to apologize for letting him buy her coffee, she could do so over dinner. She should have said no. She had said yes. She had said yes because he had looked harmless, because the truly dangerous ones, she would learn later, never look like predators. The truly dangerous ones look like the kind, slightly distracted men your mother hopes you will marry. The first 3 months had been beautiful. That was the part she had the hardest time explaining to herself later. The dinners at restaurants she could never have afforded. The way he had listened when she talked about the Dutch courtyard painting she had been working on. He had bought her a set of conservator's tools that cost more than her monthly rent. He had wrapped them in tissue paper. He had said, "Because you deserve to have the right things." The first time he had hurt her had not been physical. It had been a phone call. She had been at a friend's birthday dinner. He had called her 17 times in 2 hours, and when she had finally stepped outside to answer, he had not yelled. He had spoken in a voice so quiet she had to press the phone against her ear, and he had asked her, very gently, if she understood that he was a busy man, and that when he made time to call her, he expected her to answer. She had apologized. She had cut the dinner short. A part of her had understood, even then, that something had just been moved. A line had been drawn that had not existed before, and she had crossed to his side of it without realizing. That was how it had worked. Not with violence, with erosion. The friend whose birthday it had been stopped texting her after a few months. By month 5, he had convinced her to leave her apartment. By month 7, she had withdrawn from her graduate program. By month 8, she did not have her own checking account. By month 9, he had taken her phone and replaced it with one on his plan, and her grandmother's number had not transferred over. The first time he had raised his hand to her had been a Saturday morning in July. She had broken a coffee cup, an old ceramic one, blue, with a small chip in the handle. It had slipped from her fingers and shattered on the tile, and before she had even bent to clean it up, his hand had struck the side of her face hard enough to make her ear ring for 2 days. He had cried afterward. He had held her on the kitchen floor and wept into her hair, and he had told her he loved her more than he had ever loved anyone in his life. It had happened again 16 days later. By August, she had stopped counting. By September, her grandmother had died, and Pemberton had not let her go to the funeral. 3 weeks before the gala, she had found the envelope. It had been in the inside pocket of one of Pemberton's overcoats, the one he had asked her to take to the dry cleaner. She had carried it down to the basement, to the closet where her conservator's tools had been moved, and she had sat on the cold concrete floor and read what was inside. 6 pages. Names, dates, account numbers, wire transfers to a shell company, the names of 3 women, 3 other women, and what had been paid to make them sign non-disclosure agreements, and what had happened to the one who had refused. Her name had not been on the document, not yet, but there had been a line at the bottom, in handwriting she recognized as Pemberton's, that read, Sokolov, final terms pending, family connections minimal, estimate 40,000, NDA standard. She had read those 6 pages 41 times over the next 21 days. And on the night of the gala, she had folded them carefully and slid them into the small beaded clutch at her wrist. And she had walked into the Vance pavilion on the arm of the man whose handwriting was at the bottom of the last page. Somewhere between the third course and the auction, she had understood that there was no version of this evening in which she went home with him. There was only the version where she ended it, or the version where it ended her. He had not been on the original guest list. The Halverford Gala had been planned for 14 months, the guest list finalized in August, and Do-hyun Yoon's name had not been on it, because Do-hyun Yoon's name was not on most lists. He moved through the world quietly, and only when he chose to. His invitation had arrived 3 days before the event, hand-delivered by a man in a black suit who had not spoken a single word. The handwritten note on the back had been from a senator's wife who owed him a favor she did not yet know she owed him. It contained 4 words. He'll be there. Come. Do-hyun had come. He stood now beneath the second balcony in a charcoal suit that had been cut for him in Milan 8 years ago, with his face arranged into the kind of polite, distant expression that people in expensive rooms recognize as do not approach. He was 54 years old, just over 6 feet tall, with the build of a man who had once done physical work for a living and had never let his body forget it. His eyes were dark brown, almost black under the chandeliers. They settled on a thing and held it, and the thing being held generally understood, after a moment, that it was being seen in ways it did not wish to be seen. There was a faint scar along the left side of his jaw, 3 inches long, white now with age, that he had received at 22 during a difficult period of his early life, and had never had cosmetically corrected, because he believed a man should be able to read his history off his face. He spoke 6 languages. He had not raised his voice in 11 years. The men in the room who recognized him pretended they did not. Do-hyun Yoon ran an organization that had operated on the eastern seaboard for 31 years. It had no formal name. It did not advertise itself. It kept no public records. He was not, by his own quiet reckoning, a good man. But he had a code. The code had 3 rules, and the third was the one he had broken the fewest times in his life and would not break tonight. The third rule was, no harm to women, no harm to children, no exceptions, ever. He had come tonight because of that rule. The senator's wife had told him what she had heard about Pemberton Halverford III, what she had heard from a woman in Boston whose niece had gone on 3 dates with Pemberton in 2019 and had needed medical care afterward, and had signed a piece of paper in exchange for the bills being paid. Do-hyun had listened without interrupting. He had thanked her. He had hung up the phone. He had sat for 40 minutes in the back office of a restaurant he owned, and then he had told the man who managed his calendar that he would be attending the gala. He had come tonight to look at Pemberton. He had not come expecting to see Marin Sokolov, but he had been watching her for 20 minutes now. He had seen the way her thumb worried at the inside of her wrist, the way she flinched, almost invisibly, at the laugh of the man holding her, the way she had not eaten, the way she carried the small beaded clutch at her wrist with both hands, as if there were something inside it she was afraid of losing. He recognized that grip. He had seen it before, on the hands of his own mother, the night before she had finally tried to leave. He pulled his phone from his suit jacket. He typed a message. He sent it to a number that had no name attached to it, only a single Korean character, Hyung, older brother. The message was 4 words. The girl. Watch her. In his other pocket, his hand closed around the small object he had carried with him every day for 41 years. A coin. Bronze. worn smooth on both sides, the size of a thumbnail, his mother's. She had pressed it into his palm the morning before she died, and she had told him, in Korean, Guraido Sarayaji. Even so, you must live. He had lived. But he had never stopped looking, in every room he entered, for the woman his mother had not been allowed to become. Do-hyun Yoon had been born in a port town on the western coast of South Korea in the spring of 1971, in a one-room house behind a fish market, to a woman named Myung-ja, who was 19 years old, and a man named Jun Pyo, who was 26, and already, even then, the kind of man whose presence made other men quieter when he walked into a room. His earliest memory was of his mother singing. She had a voice that was thin and slightly off-key, but she had sung to him every night in the small space behind a curtain that separated his sleeping mat from the main room. The song was always the same, a folk song from her own mother's village, about a fisherman's wife who walked along the shore every evening waiting for a boat that, in some versions of the song, came home and in other versions, did not. His mother always sang the version where the boat came home. His second memory was of a heavy sound that had come from the main room while he was supposed to be sleeping, followed by his mother's voice, very quiet, saying his father's name, and then saying the word please, and then not saying anything at all. He had been 4 years old. By the time he was 9, he had stopped pretending to be asleep when the sounds happened. He sat up in his bedding with his hands pressed against his knees, listening, because he had decided that if he listened hard enough, he would be ready when his father came for him next. His father had not come for him often. His father had saved most of what was inside him for his mother. But there had been a night, when Do-hyun was 10, when his father had come home from a bar and had decided that whatever had gone wrong that day was Do-hyun's fault. Do-hyun had learned that night that the same hand that ruffled your hair at breakfast could become something else by nightfall. His mother had cleaned his face afterward with a cloth dipped in cold water. She had said, in a voice steadier than it had any right to be, Do-hyuna, listen to me. You will not become him. You will become someone he does not understand. He had heard her. He had become that. She had tried to leave when he was 13. She had saved, somehow, in a country where she had no formal employment. She had written to a cousin in Busan. She had received a reply that had said, "Come, bring the boy. We will find work for you." She had hidden the letter under a loose floorboard, along with a small leather wallet that held the money she had saved. She had told Do-hyun her plan on a Tuesday morning in March. They would leave on Friday before dawn. She had pressed something into his palm, a bronze coin, worn smooth, the size of a thumbnail. She had said, "This was my mother's. She said it brings you home. Hold on to it for me until we are home." He had held it. His father had found the letter on Thursday night. Do-hyun had come home from school on Thursday afternoon, and his mother had not gotten up from the floor. His father did not come back that night, or the next morning, or any morning after. Do-hyun never learned where he had gone. The neighbors said nothing. The police said nothing. In the small port town where his family had lived, certain men disappeared into certain ports, and certain questions were not asked. What Do-hyun did was simpler. He took the wallet, he took the letter, he took the bronze coin from his mother's hand, where she had still been clutching it. He walked to the harbor at dawn on Friday. He boarded a fishing boat that was leaving for the southern coast. He had not gone to the cousin in Busan. He had not, in the end, ever gone home. He had spent the next 41 years building, slowly and patiently, an organization whose third rule was the one he would never break. He had not been able to save the woman who had sung to him, but he had saved, over the years, a number that he did not keep count of, because keeping count would have suggested that the number was finite, and Do-hyun Yoon did not believe the number was finite. He stood now beneath the second balcony of the Vance Pavilion, with his hand closed around his mother's coin, watching a young woman in a borrowed gown lift a microphone from a platform. He did not yet know her name. He did not yet know what she was about to say. but he had decided that whatever happened next in this room, she was not going to leave it alone. He is not who you think he is. The microphone in Marin's hand was heavier than she had expected. It felt like a stone. She did not look at Pemberton. Looking at him was how he had always won. So she fixed her eyes on a point at the back of the room and opened her mouth to say the next sentence. She did not get to say it, because Pemberton Halverford III had moved. He moved the way men like him always moved when the world threatened to shift beneath them, smoothly, smiling. He stepped onto the platform beside her, laid one hand at the small of her back, and said, into the second microphone the master of ceremonies had been holding, "I am so sorry, everyone. My fiancé has not been well." The word fiancé landed in the room like a small bell. Marin had not known she was a fiancé. There had been, 3 nights ago, a conversation over dinner in which Pemberton had said, with great casualness, that he had decided they should be married in the spring, and that the announcement would be made tonight, and that she should wear her hair up. She had said nothing. Now, in front of 900 people, the word was hanging in the air like a curtain, because a woman with a microphone was a problem. A fiancé with a microphone was a misunderstanding. She felt his fingers tighten against her spine. It was the smallest pressure, and it said, in a language only she understood, "Sit down, Marin. Sit down right now, and I will let you finish the night." She felt her knees begin to bend. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And then she heard a voice from the floor. Not loud exactly, but somehow audible above the murmur of the room. Let her finish. The room turned. Marin turned. Pemberton turned. A man in a charcoal suit was standing alone in the center aisle, about 15 feet from the platform. He had not raised his voice. He was simply standing there, looking at Pemberton, and the look on his face was the kind that made the men in the room who recognized him take one step back without realizing they had taken it. Marin did not know who he was. She would learn his name in approximately 4 minutes. But she felt the pressure at the base of her ribcage release, not because Pemberton had moved his hand, but because Pemberton had, for the first time in 11 months, gone still. He had gone still, the way prey animals go still. The man in the charcoal suit said again, in the same low, even voice, "Let her finish." It was not a request. Pemberton's hand left Marin's back. He did it with a smile, with a small theatrical gesture, as if to say to the room, "Of course. Far be it from me to silence anyone." She raised the microphone again. She said, "He paid 3 women to disappear." She said, "Their names are in this clutch." She said, "I have wire transfer records, account numbers, the names of the law firms that drafted the non-disclosure agreements, and the name of the woman in Boston who refused to sign." She said, "I was going to be the 4th." She said, "I am not going to be the 4th." The room did not move. Marin set the microphone down. She unfolded the 6 pages with hands shaking so hard she could barely make her fingers obey, and she held them up, and she said, in a voice the entire room could hear, "I have made copies. They are with my mother, with a journalist whose name I will give to anyone who asks, and with a lawyer who, as of this morning, has retained a copy in a safety deposit box." That last part was not true. She had no lawyer, she had no journalist, but she had decided that the only way to walk out of the Vance Pavilion alive was to make the room believe that the consequences of harming her had already been prearranged. It was a bluff. It was the most important bluff of her life. The man in the charcoal suit took 2 steps forward. He did not look at the document. He did not look at Pemberton. He looked at Marin, and he said, "Miss, may I escort you out of this room?" She did not know him. She did not know his name. She knew only that he was looking at her the way no one had looked at her in 11 months. He was looking at her like a person. And he had asked. He had not gripped her elbow and steered her. He had asked, and the asking was the thing that broke the small, frozen place inside her chest. She nodded. She could not speak. She could only nod. He extended his arm, the way a man might extend an arm to his own mother at a wedding. Not to grip, to offer. She walked off the platform on legs she could not feel, and she rested her hand on the inside of his forearm, and she felt, beneath the fabric of his suit, the strength of a man whose body had been built for carrying things that other people could not carry. He walked her down the center aisle. The room watched. At the doors, he paused. He turned to a tall man who had been standing there for the entire evening, and he said, in Korean, "Geonyo ui mo don geosol jikyo." Guard everything that is hers. The tall man nodded once. Then the man in the charcoal suit walked Marin out of the Vance pavilion into the cool October night and toward a black car that was already idling at the curb. He did not speak to her again until they were 3 blocks away. When he did speak, he said only, "My name is Do Heon Yoon. You are safe. Tell me where you would like me to take you, and I will take you there. If you do not have anywhere, I have a place. There are no conditions." She had not cried in 11 months. She cried now. She cried with her face in her hands and the borrowed pearls coming loose from her ears. And Do-hyun did not touch her and did not speak. He simply waited. He had learned, a long time ago, that the most important thing you could do for someone in the first hour of their freedom was nothing at all. The car drove for 41 minutes. It drove first east, then north, then east again, in a route that did not make geographic sense and was not meant to. Do-hyun's driver, a man named Sung-won, who had been with him for 19 years, did this whenever Do-hyun was carrying a person who needed to not be findable. They stopped in front of a brownstone on a quiet street in a neighborhood Marin did not recognize. 4 stories. Brick. The window on the ground floor had a soft amber light in it, the kind of light that looks like a person waiting up. Do-hyun opened the car door for her. He did not offer his hand. She got out on her own. He removed his suit jacket and laid it across her shoulders. The jacket was warm from his body. "You will meet a woman named Hyojin inside," he said. "She has worked for me for 22 years. She has helped 7 other women sit at the table you are about to sit at. She does not ask questions you have not chosen to answer." Marin nodded. She still could not speak. Inside, the entryway smelled of tea and bread and something with garlic and ginger. Hyojin was waiting in the kitchen. She was a small woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back into a low knot. She crossed the kitchen. She took Marin's cold hands between her 2 warm ones, and she looked at Marin's face for a long moment. Then she said, in lightly accented English, "You are home now. You sit. I bring food." Marin sat. The kitchen was small and warm. There was a teapot on the table already, 3 cups, a plate of sliced pear, and a bowl of rice porridge. "Eat slowly," Hyojin said. "Your stomach forgets how." Marin had not eaten in 26 hours. She ate. The warmth spread out from her stomach in a way that made her hands begin to shake, because her body was, for the first time in a long time, allowing itself to admit that it was hungry. Do-hyun sat across from her. He did not eat. He poured himself a cup of tea, and he wrapped his hands around it, and he waited. When Marin had eaten about half of what was in front of her, she set down the spoon. She said, "Why you did that?" He said, "Tell me your name." "Marin." "Marin." He said it the way a person says a name they intend to remember. "I am going to answer your question. But I want you to tell me first how long it has been." She did not ask him to clarify. She said, 11 months. He nodded. "Did anyone know?" "No." "Family?" "My mother. She did not know how badly. My grandmother died in September. I was not allowed to go." He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, his hands around the teacup had tightened. "Tell me," he said, As much as you are able to tell me. The man you came with cannot find you. He does not know this address. Tell me what happened, and I will listen. She told him. She told him about the coffee shop on Brennan Street, the Dutch courtyard painting, the conservator's tools, the friend's birthday and the 17 phone calls, the apartment she had given up, the graduate program, the checking account that was no longer hers. She told him about the coffee cup, the kitchen floor, the 16 days, her grandmother's funeral, the envelope, the 6 pages. And then she told him, very quietly, the part she had not told anyone. He was going to make me sign tomorrow. Do-hyun did not move. There is a meeting, Myron said. 11 a.m. at his lawyer's office. I heard him on the phone. He told his lawyer to handle it the way he had handled the other 3. If I had not done what I did tonight, I would have signed that paper tomorrow. I have not known how to say no to him for 11 months. I knew that the only place I could say no to him was in a room full of people he could not reach me in front of. Do-hyun was silent for a long time. He looked down at his tea. When he spoke, he did not look up. My mother tried to leave my father when I was 13 years old. She had saved money. She had a place to go. She had a letter from a cousin. He found out the day before she planned to leave. He paused. She did not get to go. Marin did not breathe. You did, he said. You left. In the only room he could not stop you in. You left in front of 900 people. Do you understand what you did tonight, Marin? She shook her head. You did the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do. She put her face in her hands. She wept for the second time that night, and this time it was different. The first time, in the car, had been the sound of something breaking. This was the sound of something being set down. A weight she had been carrying for so long that she had forgotten it was a weight. Hyojin came back into the kitchen quietly. She set a folded blanket on the chair next to Marin. She refilled the teapot. She did not speak. When Marin had quieted, Do-hyun said, I am going to make 4 phone calls tonight, with your permission. You may say no to any of them. She nodded. The first is to a journalist. Her name is Yuna Park. Your document, if you allow it, will be in her hands by morning. She will protect you. Pemberton will be charged within 90 days. Yes. The second is to a lawyer. Her name is Constance Aberline. Tomorrow morning, she will file an emergency restraining order and begin recovering your assets. Constance does not lose. Yes. The third is to your mother. I will not make this call. You will. We have her number. I had it within 40 minutes of seeing your hands at the gala. Marin's eyes filled again. Yes. The 4th call is one I will make alone. I will tell you only this. Pemberton will not look for you. By Friday morning, the man you knew will not exist in any form that can reach you. She looked at him. Are you going to hurt him? Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. No. The world is going to hurt him. I am only going to make sure the world is paying attention. She believed him, the way you believe weather. Hyojin appeared at her elbow with a phone. She had already dialed the number. Marin took the phone with both hands, and somewhere in upstate New York, a woman who had not heard her daughter's voice in 7 months picked up after the second ring. Marin said, Mama. She did not say anything else for a long time. She did not need to. What happened over the next 72 hours was the kind of thing that, if you were standing inside it, did not feel like a story. It felt like weather. It felt like a great many adults, in a great many separate offices, picking up phones at roughly the same time and saying, very quietly, yes. By 4:14 a.m., on the night of the gala, the journalist Yuna Park was sitting at her kitchen table with the 6 pages spread out in front of her. By 6 a.m., she had verified 2 of the 3 names. By 9 a.m., she had reached the woman in Vermont who had refused to sign 3 years earlier, and the woman in Vermont had spoken to her for an hour and 40 minutes. By noon, 2 of Yuna's colleagues at separate publications had been quietly briefed. A story like this needed to be too big to bury. At 7:30 a.m., Constance Aberline filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. The judge granted it without a hearing. By 8:45 a.m., a process server was standing in the lobby of Pemberton's building. By 9:02 a.m., he had been served. He had not slept. He had spent the night making phone calls, and the phone calls had not gone the way they had gone for him for the previous 20 years. The senator who had taken his money in 2017 had not picked up. The board member of the foundation, who had been his godfather, had not picked up. The lawyer who had drafted the 3 non-disclosure agreements had picked up briefly and had said, in a voice Pemberton had never heard him use before, "Pemberton, do not call this number again," and had hung up. By noon, 3 different newsrooms were in possession of the same 6 pages. By 3 p.m., the Halverford Foundation had announced that Pemberton had stepped down from its board, effective immediately. By 5 p.m., the pharmaceutical conglomerate whose CEO had been at the gala had quietly informed Pemberton that his consulting contract was being reviewed. By 9 p.m., the woman in Vermont had begun typing the testimony she had refused to give for 3 years. Marin slept in a small guest room on the 3rd floor of the brownstone for 14 hours. She woke up at 4 in the afternoon. There was a clean cotton nightgown laid out at the foot of the bed. There was a small note on her folded gown that read, "I will return the gown for you. Do not wear it again. Hyojin." There were also, on the dresser, 3 things. A new phone, activated in her name, with her own number restored. A small envelope of cash. She would learn later that it was $4,000, with a typed note that read, "For the next 2 weeks. Do not accept charity from anyone you do not know. This is not charity. This is what is yours." And the bronze coin. Do-hyun's mother's coin. It was sitting on a small folded square of paper, and the paper, when she unfolded it, said, "Borrow this. You will return it when you are home in yourself again." She held the coin in her palm for a long time. She did not yet understand what it meant. She would not understand for several months. But she understood that she had been handed something that did not belong to her and that she had been trusted with all the same. She closed her fingers around it. Do-hyun did not come to the brownstone that day. He did not call. He had learned over 40 years that there was a moment in every rescue at which the rescuer became the next person the rescued had to escape. He did not intend to become that person. But he did, on the second night, send one message. It arrived at her new phone at 11:47 p.m. "You are doing well. Sleep when you can. The world is moving in your direction. D." She read it 3 times. She did not reply. She did not need to. She turned off the phone, set it beside the bronze coin on the bedside table, and slept for 10 hours straight. The article ran on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after the gala. It was published simultaneously in 3 outlets, a deliberate choice, because Una Park and her colleagues had decided that the story was not going to be one any single legal team could threaten or settle into silence. The piece was 11,000 words long. It named Pemberton Halverford III. It named the 3 women whose names had appeared on the 6 pages, with their consent, and a 4th woman in Vermont, who had refused to sign and was now speaking on the record. Marin's name did not appear in the article. She had been given the choice. She had decided that she would tell her own story in her own time, and that she did not need to tell it on the morning of someone else's reckoning. The article was, by 10 a.m. on the day it ran, the most shared piece of journalism on 3 continents. By noon, the district attorney for the relevant county had announced an investigation. By 2 p.m., a second district attorney had announced a second investigation into a different incident from 2018 that was now being reopened. By 4 p.m., the Halverford Foundation had announced that Pemberton's name would be removed from the wing of the museum that bore it. Constance Aberline called Marin on Wednesday morning. She said, "I have good news and good news. Which would you like first?" Marin laughed. It was the first time in a year. The first piece, Constance said, is that the temporary restraining order is being converted to a permanent one. Pemberton's lawyers did not contest. They have begun to understand the scope of what is coming for him. Okay. The second piece is that I have recovered your apartment. Marin sat down on the floor of the kitchen. I am sorry? Your apartment, Marin. The one you gave up. I have spoken to your former landlord, who, it turns out, never wanted you to leave in the first place. He has agreed to terminate the current lease and restore yours, with all back rent forgiven. Yours is waiting for you. Marin did not speak for a long time. And your graduate program, Constance said, has been informed that your withdrawal was made under coercive circumstances. You may return in the spring. Your scholarship has been reinstated. The Dutch courtyard painting is still in the conservation lab waiting for you. Marin put the phone down on the kitchen floor and pressed both hands over her mouth. Hyojin came in from the living room, took one look at her, and sat down on the floor beside her, and put a hand on her back, and waited. That afternoon, Marin took a train to upstate New York. Her mother met her at the station, and the two of them stood on the platform holding each other for a long time without speaking, while a slow snow began to fall around them. Inside the house, on the kitchen table, was a meal her mother had made. Beef stew, biscuits, and a small bowl of pickled cucumbers her grandmother had taught her mother to make, and her mother had taught her, and that no one in the family had made since her grandmother had died. They ate. They ate slowly. They did not talk about Pemberton. They talked about the painting, the Dutch courtyard, the way the varnish had been giving Marin trouble the night she had stopped at the coffee shop. Her mother said, "Are you going to finish it?" Marin said, "Yes." She said it in a voice her mother had not heard in over a year. Her mother put down her fork. She reached across the table. She took Marin's hand. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. 3 months passed. They were not easy months. The bravest thing Marin had done at the gala had not, it turned out, been the last brave thing she had to do. There were depositions. There were nights when she woke up at 3 a.m. with her heart beating so hard she thought it would crack a rib. There were mornings when she could not remember how to be a person who lived alone, how to answer her own phone without first checking whether the call was permitted. There were therapists. There were medications. There were long, quiet afternoons in the conservation lab with the Dutch courtyard painting under the bright lamps, when she would simply stand in front of the canvas with a brush in her hand and not move for 40 minutes. Because the work of returning required, sometimes, simply being in the same room as the thing that had been waiting for her. But the months passed. She slept. She ate. She made the pickled cucumbers from her grandmother's recipe in her own kitchen for the first time, and she cried while she made them, and then she ate them, and then she made them again the following week. She went back to graduate school in January. The Dutch courtyard painting, in February, was finished. It hung in a small group exhibition at the Met for 2 weeks. She stood in front of it with her mother on the opening night, and her mother, who had never been to the Met before, cried quietly, and Marin held her arm. Pemberton Halverford was indicted in March. The trial would take a year. He would be convicted on 7 of the 9 counts. He would serve 22 years. He would never again be a man who walked into a room and made it quieter. But the legal story was not, in the end, the story that mattered most to Marin. The story that mattered most was a small one. In late March, on a Saturday afternoon, she went back to the coffee shop on the corner of Brennan Street and 9th. She had not been back in nearly 2 years. She had avoided it for the obvious reason, and also for a less obvious one, which was that a part of her had blamed the coffee shop, in the small, irrational way bodies blame places, for what had happened to her there. She walked in on a gray afternoon with snow on the ground. She ordered the smallest coffee on the menu. She paid for her own coffee. She sat at a small table by the window. She took from her bag a sketchbook and a pencil. And she drew, very slowly, the seat across from her. It was empty. She drew the empty chair, and the way the light fell across it, and the way the chair would continue to wait for no one for as long as she chose. She closed the sketchbook. She sat there for an hour and a half, and she watched the snow, and she drank her own coffee, and no one bought her anything. When she left, she walked the long way home. She bought a loaf of cinnamon bread from the small bakery where her grandmother had once bought her one when she was 8 years old. She carried it home. That night, she sat on her couch in the apartment she had once given up. She ate cinnamon bread. She watched a movie she had wanted to watch for a year. The apartment was quiet, and the door was locked, and the lock was the kind of lock you turned because you wanted to. There was a small object on her bookshelf, a bronze coin. She had not yet returned it. She had not seen Do-hyun since the night of the gala. She had received, over the months, 3 short messages from him, brief and asking for nothing. She would return it on the 1-year anniversary, because she felt 1 year was the right amount of time for a borrowed thing to be borrowed, and because she wanted to give it back in a place where she could look him in the face and say, "I am home in myself now. Thank you for lending me this." But that was 7 months away. For now, she pulled a blanket over her legs, and she let the movie play, and she fell asleep on the couch around 11 p.m., and she slept until morning. The deadbolt was locked. She had locked it. She had wanted to. 1 year and 3 days after the gala, on an October evening, Do-hyun parked his car across the street from a small art gallery on the Lower East Side. The gallery was hosting an opening that night. The artist was a young conservator who had also begun, over the previous year, to make her own work for the first time. The pieces were small. A series of paintings depicting empty rooms, a kitchen, a hallway, a bedroom, a coffee shop with one chair pulled out from a small table by the window. The rooms were lit in late afternoon light, and they were not occupied, but they did not feel sad. They felt like rooms that had been left very deliberately, by someone who had walked out of them on her own. The series was titled simply After. Do-hyun did not go inside. He had not come to be seen. He had come because Constance had mentioned that the show was opening, and because he had wanted, the way one sometimes wants to look at a tree one has watched grow, to see for himself. He stood across the street with his hands in the pockets of a long wool coat. He watched through the gallery's front window. He saw Marin Sokolov. She was wearing a green sweater, and her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was standing beside her mother. The two of them were laughing at something. She looked, he thought, like a person. Not like a person who had survived something. Not like a person carrying something. Like a person, at a gallery opening, on a Wednesday evening in October. He did not need anything more than that. He turned to walk back to his car, and as he turned, he saw, on the front desk of the gallery just inside the window, a small object. It was a bronze coin, sitting on top of a folded square of paper, on top of the gallery's guest book, where he would not have missed it if he had walked inside. He did not walk inside. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, and he understood that she had known he would come, and that she had known he would not come in, and that she had left him, in the only way they had ever communicated, the message she had been waiting a year to give him. He smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in a long time. He walked back to his car. He told Sungwon to drive him home the long way. He slid his hand into the pocket of his coat, and his hand found the small, empty space where a coin had once been. He had carried that coin for 42 years. He did not carry it tonight. He had not been able to save the woman who sang to him. But the coin had not been about saving. The coin had been about holding on, the way his mother had pressed it into his palm and said, "Even so, you must live." He had lived. And tonight, a young woman who had once stood in a borrowed gown on a marble platform in the Vance Pavilion had returned the coin to him, not because it needed returning, but because she was telling him the only thing he had ever wanted to know. That she had become someone who could let it go. That she was home in herself again. In a small apartment on the west side, in a kitchen lit by a single lamp, Marin Sokolov stood at her counter slicing a pear into thin, even pieces. She poured tea from a teapot Hyojin had given her in May. She ate the pear slowly, the way Hyojin had taught her, and she watched the snow begin to fall outside her window. Across the city, in a brownstone on a quiet street, Do-heon walked into his own kitchen, and Hyojin looked up from the sink, and she took down a second teacup and set it on the table beside his, and she poured. He sat down. He drank. He thought of his mother. He thought of the song about the fisherman's wife who walked along the shore every evening, waiting for a boat that, in some versions, came home. His mother had always sung the version where the boat came home. She had been singing it all those years, not because she believed it. She had been singing it because she had wanted him to, and he had. He had spent 42 years pulling boats home, one by one, because every time he pulled one home, his mother got home too, in the small, invisible way that the dead come home through the living. Tonight, Marin Sokolov had pulled herself home. She had not needed his coin to do it. She had only needed someone to lend it to her until she did not. He set down his teacup. He said, in Korean, Imonim, Gamsahamnida, Auntie. Thank you. Hyojin did not turn around. She said, Eo seo du seyo, cha sikeo yo. Drink up, your tea is getting cold. He smiled again. He drank his tea. Outside, the snow fell on the city, and somewhere in the falling snow, a young woman who had once been told that she would not be allowed to attend her own grandmother's funeral was sitting at her own table in her own apartment, and the door behind her was locked because she had locked it, and the lamp beside her was on because she had turned it on, and the life around her was hers, all of it, every small piece of it, hers, finally and entirely hers. She had crossed a line no one expected, and on the other side of that line, she had found a kitchen, and a teapot, and a coin to borrow, and a stranger who had asked her, instead of telling her, and a mother on a train platform in the snow, and a Dutch courtyard painting waiting for her to come home and finish it. She had found, in the end, the version of the song where the boat came home. She had become the boat.